I was one of those who was always fascinated by abandoned places. The ghosts of the past always attracted me with their mystery and silence. One day I decided it was time to visit one of the most famous places, Pripyat, the ghost town in the exclusion zone, left behind after the Chernobyl disaster. I was neither a stalker nor a thrill seeker. I just wanted to understand what it means to live in a city destined for oblivion. I found a guide who agreed to take me through the zone. My escort, an old man named Vasil, was one of those who survived the evacuation and now lived in one of the villages near the zone. He was quiet but knew his way around. We arrived in Pripyat in an old UAZ. The gray sky, covered with clouds, gave everything a gloomy look. Broken roads, overgrown with trees, buildings with broken windows. Everything seemed like from another world. It felt like time itself had stopped here in 1986. We entered one of the high-rise buildings, where time and nature had long since taken their toll. Vasil led me through dark corridors, showing me places where people once lived. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Suddenly he stopped and said he would not go any further. He said that shadows lived in that part of the building. He didn't answer my question, just turned and walked back to the exit. I was left alone. My heart was pounding, but curiosity won over fear. I continued my way deeper into the building. In each room, you could feel the presence of those who once lived there. Photos on the walls, abandoned toys, clothes. It all seemed like someone had left it here just yesterday. On one of the floors, I found an old diary. Dusty pages soaked by the rain were hard to read, but I managed to make out some entries. These were the last days of a family before the evacuation. The entries were filled with fear and uncertainty. The last words of the diary were, "We are leaving, but something is left here, something that will not let us go." Suddenly I heard a faint whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I realized the words were repeating. I carefully walked towards the sound, which led me to one of the rooms. There, in the middle of the room, stood an old crib. The whisper grew louder, and I felt a cold breath on my face. I started to panic and decided it was time to leave. But as soon as I turned around, the door slammed shut in front of me. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw a shadow approaching me. Its face was distorted with pain and horror. I rushed to the door and tried to open it with all my strength. When I finally managed to do so, I flew out of the room and ran down the corridors. The shadow chased me, its footsteps getting closer and closer. My heart was pounding as if it would stop any moment. I ran without looking back until I burst out onto the street. Vasil was waiting for me by the car. He looked at me with his old eyes and silently got behind the wheel. We left Pripyat, leaving the ghost town behind. In the car, I tried to calm down, but the shadow I saw kept haunting my mind. When we returned to the village, Vasil said one thing to me. "Pripyat remembers everyone who was there, but not everyone can come back." I will never forget those words and the horror I experienced in the ghost town. When I returned home, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The shadows of Pripyat haunted my dreams. I realized that not all secrets of the past should be revealed. Sometimes it is better to leave them alone, not to awaken what hides in the darkness. I have always been the one who seeks adventure. My name is Mark, and I am a journalist. My passion is to find stories where others see only emptiness. That's how I ended up in Pripyat, a ghost town abandoned by people after the Chernobyl disaster. This place has long become a legend for those who crave real adrenaline. But I didn't just want to write another article. I wanted to see and feel what was left after the people, those who were forced to leave their homes. My journey to the exclusion zone began with endless formalities and permits. Eventually, I reached my goal. Standing at the entrance to Pripyat, I felt a chilling cold that penetrated my bones. An absolute silence reigned around, occasionally interrupted by the sound of the wind passing through the ruins of buildings. I stopped by an abandoned playground where a swing slowly moved from the wind, creating a creaking sound. It reminded me of the life that once thrived in this place, but now everything seemed frozen in time. I began my journey through the city, observing the ruined buildings covered with a thick layer of dust. My steps led me to one of the residential buildings. The door was open, and I decided to enter. Inside, there was semi-darkness. I climbed the creaking stairs, which seemed to collapse under my feet at any moment. Each step felt like a challenge, but curiosity pushed me forward. On the third floor, I saw an apartment with an open door. Deciding to take a look inside, I noticed that many personal belongings of the former residents remained here. The walls were covered with yellowed wallpaper, and the floor with pieces of furniture. On the table lay photographs, black and white pictures of a family that must have lived here many years ago. I picked up one of the photographs and saw smiling people holding hands. At that moment, I felt a strange sense of presence, as if someone was watching me. Suddenly, I heard a light rustling. Turning around, I saw a shadow flickering past the door. My heart beat faster, but I decided it was just a play of light and shadows. But soon I realized I was wrong. I began to hear faint footsteps coming from the corridor. They were footsteps approaching me. I stepped out into the corridor, but there was no one there. It seemed that the sounds were coming from the stairs. I cautiously began to descend. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the sense of presence only intensified. When I reached the first floor, I saw a shadow in the corner. It was a female figure standing still. "Who are you?" I asked, but received no answer. The shadow began to slowly move toward me, and I felt a cold breath that pierced my heart. I took a step back, but the shadow disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. I thought I was losing my mind, but deciding it was just my imagination, I left the building and headed to another part of the city. My goal was the Pripyat Hotel. This huge building always attracted me with its ominous grandeur. Inside the hotel, there was semi-darkness, but I still decided to climb to the top floor. The stairs were covered with dust, and each step echoed dully. When I reached the top floor, I saw that one of the room doors was open. It was dark inside, but I dared to enter. The room was empty, with only an old bed in the middle. I approached and noticed an old doll lying on the bed. Its glass eyes stared straight at me. At that moment, I heard a voice, weak but clear. "Leave this place," the voice said. I turned around but saw no one. The sense of presence was so strong that I could no longer stay in this room. I ran out of the hotel and down the street, not looking back. Pripyat swallowed me with its shadows, its ghosts. I realized that this place keeps the memories of those who once lived here, and they do not want to be disturbed. My journey to the exclusion zone became a lesson. Some places are better left alone, as they keep their secrets and ghosts that do not want to be found. I left Pripyat with a feeling of fear that stayed with me long after. The ghost town left an indelible mark on my heart, reminding me that some stories are better left untold. My name is David, and I work as a journalist in New York. My job involves traveling to various places, but this assignment was special, a trip to the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, Pripyat. My goal was to gather material for an article about life in the abandoned city. The day was sunny when my colleagues and I arrived at the edge of the zone. Our official permits were in order, and our guide, Serhi, led us through the checkpoint. The bus rattled on the uneven road, and I watched through the window at the abandoned buildings that nature had begun to reclaim. Upon arriving in Pripyat, we got off the bus. The air was heavy, as if saturated with the spirit of the past. Serhi led us through the city center, where there had once been life, laughter, and the chatter of children. Now there was a silence that chilled the soul, but the real eeriness began later. Our plan included visiting several iconic places, the hospital, the kindergarten, and the local amusement park. We split into two groups to cover more territory. My group consisted of me, Serhiy, and my colleague, Elena. We started with the hospital. As soon as we entered, the smell of dust and mold hit us. The walls were covered in graffiti and peeling paint. Serhiy recounted the panic that had engulfed this place during the evacuation. We walked through the corridors when I saw something strange, a shadow that seemed to move on its own. "Did you see that?" I asked, trying to remain calm. Elena and Serhiy looked at me in surprise. "What exactly?" Elena asked. "There, in the corridor, a shadow." "It moved," I replied, pointing in the direction. Serhiy smiled. "Maybe it's just a play of light," he said, but I saw a shadow of doubt in his eyes. We continued on our way. The hospital was enormous, and every room told its own sad story. We photographed the remnants of medical instruments, empty beds, broken furniture. It felt like we were disturbing the peace of this place. Leaving the hospital, we headed to the kindergarten. It was even creepier here. Small beds, toys scattered on the floor, notebooks with children's drawings, all of it evoked deep sadness. I again felt like someone was watching us. "David, you look a bit uneasy," Elena noted as we explored the rooms. "I feel like someone is following us," I replied quietly. "That's a common reaction," Serhiy reassured me. "Many people feel that way here. This place has its own energy." But I was convinced it was more than just a feeling. We took a few more photos and headed to the final stop of our trip, the amusement park. The famous Ferris wheel loomed over us, a reminder of lost dreams and hopes. "This was the center of fun," Serhiy explained. "The wheel was supposed to open a few days after the accident." We stopped by the carousel. I took out my camera and started taking pictures when I heard a quiet child's laugh. "Did you hear that?" I asked, freezing in place. Elena nodded, and I saw her face turn pale. Serhiy looked around but said nothing. We decided to approach the source of the sound. The laughter was coming from an abandoned building nearby. We cautiously approached the entrance. Inside, it was dark, and we turned on our flashlights. The light revealed crumbling walls and broken windows. In one corner of the room, I saw movement. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence. Then the laughter again, closer this time. We moved forward until we reached a small room where a doll lay on the floor. Its eyes seemed to be staring right at me. "It's just a doll," Elena tried to reassure herself, but I felt a chill down my spine. Serhiy picked up the doll and examined it. Nothing unusual, but when he put it back, we all heard footsteps approaching us from outside. Someone or something was nearby. We decided to leave quickly and head back to the bus. With each step back, I felt the pressure building. Finally, reaching the exit, we looked back and saw a shadow moving behind us. We ran without looking back. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind couldn't find an explanation for what we had seen. Reaching the bus, we jumped inside and told the driver to leave immediately. As we drove away from Pripyat, I looked out the window and saw the shadows of old buildings merging with the darkness. I didn't know what we had encountered, but I understood one thing. The exclusion zone is alive, and it doesn't want to be forgotten. I never thought I would return here. Pripyat, the ghost town abandoned by people after the terrible disaster of 1986, always filled me with fear and awe. But the desire to uncover the truth about the events that took place here overcame all my fears. Now, holding an old flashlight in my hand, I stood at the entrance to the exclusion zone, feeling the cold wind creep under my jacket. I entered the zone under the cover of night to avoid the patrols. My plan was simple: find the old kindergarten where strange events were rumored to have occurred after the disaster. Locals spoke of ghosts appearing at night and strange sounds echoing between the abandoned buildings. These were just rumors, but something about these stories wouldn't let me rest. As I walked through the narrow streets, I felt the silence around me growing deeper. No bird sounds, no car noises, only the wind rustling through the remains of buildings. With each step, I felt increasingly detached from the world, as if entering another reality. I found the kindergarten faster than I expected. It stood in the middle of an overgrown yard, surrounded by tall grasses and bushes. The old, partially destroyed fence created the impression that time had stopped here. I went inside, feeling the cold creeping into my heart. The interiors were filled with remnants of children's toys, worn-out furniture, and peeling walls. My heart beat faster as I approached an old board covered in children's drawings. Footprints on the floor indicated I wasn't the first one here since the evacuation. Suddenly, I heard a strange sound. It was like a whisper coming from one corner of the room. I turned around and saw a shadow flit behind an old wardrobe. My nerves were on edge, but I gathered all my courage and approached. There was nothing behind the wardrobe, but the feeling of someone else's presence didn't leave me. I climbed to the second floor, where the bedrooms were located. The old beds, covered in dust and remnants of linens, reminded me of the times when children lived here. On one of the beds, I saw an old plush bear. When I touched it to pick it up, it suddenly fell off the bed as if someone had pushed it from the other side. My heart pounded in my chest, and fear gripped every cell of my body. I decided to leave this place and go downstairs, but as I approached the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw the figure of a child standing at the end of the corridor. Her eyes, empty and soulless, stared straight at me. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was impossible. I instantly realized this wasn't just a ghost, but something much worse. I dashed to the exit, trying to escape this terrifying entity. Descending the stairs, I realized the door I had entered was locked. Panic gripped me, but I found another exit through a broken window. Once outside, I began to run without looking back. When I was already at the edge of the exclusion zone, I heard a scream behind me. It was the same child's voice echoing in the darkness. I couldn't hold myself back and turned around. No one was there, but the sense of presence didn't leave me. Returning home, I couldn't sleep for a long time. What I saw in Pripyat left an indelible mark on my consciousness. I knew I would never return there, but that child's scream would haunt me for the rest of my life. The next day, I decided to share my story with you. Pripyat is not just an abandoned town. It's a place where memories and fears live. Perhaps it's these that make this place so eerie and unforgettable. I urge you to be careful and remember that some places are better left in the past. I decided to research more about this place. As I began reading stories from other people who had experienced similar encounters in the exclusion zone, I realized my experiences were not unique. Other researchers, tourists, and even stalkers spoke of encounters with ghosts, strange sounds, and the feeling of being followed. One of the researchers I contacted recounted his night in an old school in Pripyat. He also heard children's laughter and footsteps, saw shadows moving without a light source. Another spoke of strange flashes of light at night that couldn't be explained by natural causes. This only confirmed my own observations. I began to understand that these phenomena might be connected to the energy left behind after the disaster. Perhaps the souls of those who died during the evacuation or later from radiation effects still linger in the zone, unable to find peace. This thought chilled my blood, but at the same time sparked my interest in further research. I returned to Pripyat several more times, each time trying to find more answers. But every time I faced the same eerie atmosphere and inexplicable phenomena. Once, I found an old diary of one of the kindergarten teachers, in which she wrote about strange events happening before the disaster. She mentioned children's nightmares and their stories about black people who came to them in their dreams. This diary became the last straw for me. I realized that Pripyat is not just a place of technological catastrophe, but a place with a long history filled with secrets and mysteries. I decided to leave this place forever, but the memories of it will stay with me forever. My story is a warning to anyone who wants to visit the exclusion zone. Remember that some places are better left undisturbed, and not all mysteries are meant to be uncovered. Pripyat is a place where the past and present meet, creating an atmosphere that keeps even the most experienced researchers on edge.